Hey guys, welcome back. My name's Dave and this is the OK Teacher. And in our last lesson, we talked about the causes of World War I. We talked about how there are a bunch of different factors in Europe, including militarism, nationalism, imperialism, colonialism, and the alliance system, which kind of work together to create a real sense of tension in Europe around the first 15 years of the 20th century. And how that was the spark of the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which set off the powder keg of Europe, as it was called. Today, I'd like to offer an extension activity that we can do to investigate this a little bit further. And for this, we're going to look at the idea of causes and consequences a little bit more. I've once again linked the Historical Thinking Project here, and I would again refer you to there for a more in-depth analysis of how cause and consequence helps in historical study. But for today, what I'd really like to do is just basically talk about how we can look at the causes of an event to really understand the consequences of that event. Causes and consequences means looking into the actions, the beliefs, and the circumstances which led to the consequences. And the big idea here is that World War I is a consequence of multiple different causes. So how do we investigate this sort of thing? Well, one way that we can do that is by using a timeline. Timelines are very useful in terms of organizing events chronologically, and they allow us to see these sort of patterns of cause and consequence that emerge in historical study. So what I'm proposing as a activity here is essentially a web quest. I've mentioned a bunch of these things in my last video, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more about them, here's a good way that you could do that. Fill out a timeline with the following events on them. There's the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the Franco-Prussian alliance, the Austria-Hungarian annexation of Bosnia, the Franco-Prussian War, Germany invading France via Belgium, the creation of the Schlieffen Plan, and the July crisis. If we take a look at, just do an online search and take a look at different sources and see, you can look for, first of all, when did all these events happen? And if you're interested, dig around a little bit more and see what else you can learn about these events. Once you have that, take a look at the way that those events are patterned on the timeline. Draw a line between events that appear to have a cause and consequence relationship. And we can talk then about what are the consequences of these events. So I'll give you a minute. Take a second, pause the video, go do a little bit of research and check back in, and we'll see how these events fit together and we'll see what we can learn about them. So if you've managed to look around and using online sources find some of this information, you might end up putting your timeline in an order that looks a little bit like this. And it all really starts back with the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. That was the war when Germany emerged as a power on the European continent, and it also emerged as a moment of sincere embarrassment and national pride being stung on the French behalf. The French people, following this event, ended up with a long sort of period of what they called revanchism, a desire for revenge against Germany. And Germany emerged with a strong sense of nationalism coming out of this big victory. And if we look at the cause and consequences of this, one of the things that we really need to pay attention to is just how much that nationalism and militarism that we talked about as the start of World War I really was born in this conflict here. Following the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, what we can see is the emergence of the Franco-Russian alliance in 1892. 20 years after that war concluded, France signed a treaty with Russia, believing that it would be able to protect itself by having a power on the opposite side of Germany, so that if another war broke out, rather when the next war broke out, Germany would be forced to fight on two sides, and therefore much less likely to be a threat or a danger to France. In 1905, the Germans created a plan for invasion of France called the Schlieffen Plan. And it's significant that this happened 10 years almost before the war actually began. Germany was ready for the next war with France. At this point, the writing was pretty clearly on the wall that there would be another conflict with France. This nationalism, this militarism, this sense of revanchism in France, all really kind of pointed to the fact that Germany and France were not quite finished yet and needed and would eventually have another conflict. And so this Schlieffen plan, which was created, was designed as a way to quickly knock France out of the next war. And the organization of this plan was based on the knowledge that France had an alliance with Russia. Germany's plan here was to invade via Belgium and hopefully knock France quickly out of the war before the Russians could really get engaged and mobilize. And then Germany could deal with France first and then Russia afterwards. So the whole design of the Schlieffen Plan was based upon this alliance system. So again, we see this sort of pattern of causation. The Franco-Prussian War leads to this alliance with Russia. The alliance with Russia leads to the creation of a German war plan. If we shift from France and Germany down to the southern part of Europe, we can see that in 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia, and that had some long-lasting implications in that part of Europe as well. It was the annexation of Bosnia which led to this nationalist fever among Bosnian Serbs, which created groups like the Black Hand, the group of assassins that eventually assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June the 28th, 1914. This assassination was born really in 1908 when Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia from the Serbs, and it really kind of set off this wave of angry nationalism in that part of Europe. The July crisis in July of 1914 was the period that followed the assassination, and here is where we start to see all these different pieces tying together. It's anger towards Serbia, which pushes Austria into action. It's Russia standing up for Serbia, knowing that they have a military alliance with France. It's Germany being ready to fight a war, knowing that they've got a plan to deal with France and Russia at the same time. And finally, we see Germany's invasion of France via Belgium using the Schlieffen Plan in August of 1914. That plan, of course, built in 1905, and it was the fact that they crossed across Belgium which brought Britain into the war, and which therefore brought Canada into the war. So when we look at a timeline, we can really start to see these patterns, this sort of chain of causation. And we can see this in a variety of places as well. One really interesting place we can look is in art, and art, seeing art as a reflection of culture. This painting, for example, was painted by Bétanier in 1877, so about 7 years after the Franco-Prussian War. And the painting is titled La Tache Noire, the black spot, or the black stain, which refers to the area of France that was conquered by the Germans during the Franco-Prussian War. We can see in the map, this is a teacher pointing a student at an area in France, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and you can see there's this sort of a black territory in the upper right-hand corner of the map. This is the province of Alsace and Lorraine, a rich industrial area which was captured by the Germans during the Franco-Prussian War. And this painting really kind of captures a lot of those cause and consequences and the lasting implications. We can see, for example, this sense of nationalism, and look at all the students staring somberly at this part of France that was ripped away. We can see that it was painted black on the map as an indication of loss. But it also kind of reflects the militarism of the time. You can see, for example, the boy at the front of the class wearing a military uniform. There's another boy in the front row wearing some sort of military decoration on his vest, and even behind the teacher's arm, the drums of a military band. This painting really reflects that sort of cultural piece at the time, that this was something that France was very bothered by and sought out immediately following the Franco-Prussian War. Started making plans to think, how am I going to get this back in the next war? And this is part of the long-lasting implications of the Franco-Prussian War. That's the way that cause and consequences work. There's sort of a chain of causation there then between 1870 and 1914. And the piece that is really interesting to us in terms of historical study is thinking about this. If the Franco-Prussian War, if this war spawned all these chains of causation, if it spawned military alliances and it spawned nationalist fever and it spawned militarism and it spawned this sort of culture of revenge and it spawned military plans, if these are the chain of causation coming out of the Franco-Prussian War, what will be the consequences of World War One? What are the chain of causation? How does the chain of causation continue after 1914? Historical inquiry is going to help us find that out, and that's really going to be kind of the focus that we look at in our Canadian history course. If we understand this is how Canada got into World War One, there are a whole number of chains of causation which follow that moment, which really kind of shape and define what Canada is going to look like for the remainder of the 20th century and even to today. So that's a general look at sort of how cause and consequence work and how we can use cause and consequence in the study of history. In our next video, we'll go back to the history of World War One, start taking a look at some of the major changes on the battlefield then, and talk about how that impacted the war. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, you can contact me. All my information is in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. You can check out my Twitter handle, which is at the OK Teacher. You can check out my website, which is www.okteach.ca. You can see my email up there as well. I hope to see you in the next video. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, thumbs up if you liked it, and I will catch you then. Thanks, guys.